we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Bigmark, and just before we start, as always, if you like everything, please rate the podcast. We started up our Patreon. If you guys like the podcast, we're not doing any ads or anything, so we're trying to keep that down. So you can go and support the podcast there. And like I said, anytime you guys want to get a hold of us, look us up on Twitter and all that stuff. But, today I'm super excited to bring on Travis Kanellos, my good buddy. How are you?
What's going on, man? How are you?
Great, man. Great to have you on.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, for sure. And, it's been a while since we kind of caught up, and it's always fun to do these, to do the podcast with a buddy you haven't talked to in a while, because there's always a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, man.
So I guess, for everyone listening, you and I met because I used to work out at your gym, DNA Fitness, baby.
Yeah, repping the orange. I like it, bro. I like it.
That's right. So I was talking to Christian about this before, but I was telling everyone how this actual shirt came about. So how about you tell everyone your whole idea around the shirt?
Oh man, so we started lifting. We got a bunch of guys in, and we said, there's got to be at some point. We've got to have some sort of prize. We've got a bunch of athletes in there, a bunch of meatheads going after it.
Right. And
like, okay, at some point, we've got to reward some of these guys for busting their ass. And we as the coaches, we used to wear the orange shirt. Everyone was like, man, we got to get some of those. So we're like, okay, you know what? Let's break this out.
Yeah.
Let's make it a little more real, and let's start giving some of these away for some guys that are busting their nuts. So that's really how it came about, man. And then it spurred on from there. And what's kind of funny is, not to say that we're some like world-class leading, facility that's got 50 gold medalists, but it's crazy. I've run into people in the last 2 years, and I'll see them in a grocery store, 150 feet away. And I'm like, man, that's an orange shirt right there.
Yes.
That's it, man. That's it. So it's cool.
Unreal. And I remember because you came up with a game because, we had guys, we had lacrosse players, we had football players, basketball players, right? Everyone's going to have their own kind of skill set. And it was hard to come up with some type of not only just some type of skill testing game that no one was going to have any distinct advantage in.
Yeah.
And I remember, at least for this one, we had to roll a 1 pound medicine ball, across the turf and get it as close to the wall without hitting it. Right. And there you go. It's perfect. Right. And coming up with that is again, it's not trying to make it even for everybody was unreal.
Yeah, man, that was tough, right? You got a bunch of athletes in there competing. Like you said, we've got lax guys, you got football guys, hockey guys, everything in between, to get everyone in there and figure out how you're going to get these athletes, guys and girls, frankly, right, male and female across the board. How are you going to get them to compete against something? And that's kind of how it spurred it on, right? And something that's the contests were very much zero athletic ability,
right?
And
that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about, man.
Because everyone, it's funny across every sport, everyone's going to have their own distinct advantage. And, when you're in the gym too, obviously strength was always a factor too. And I remember being at school and being in the gym and, it'd be all the football guys getting after it. And then some first year track athletes would come in and they just turn right around.
Yeah.
It would just be too intimidating. And again, creating that atmosphere where you can say, hey, everyone's a part of this. No one has any advantage over the next person. Totally continued to build that foundation, but not only that, but it was just that camaraderie that existed in the gym, which was so important, and it kept everyone coming back, right?
Yeah, I think so, man. I think that, when you have a place that promotes, we used to joke, we used to have kind of a running joke. We used to say man, some of these days are tough. And it's yeah, we discriminate evenly across the board here. We don't give a shit what color you are, where you came from, what your background is, what sport you play. Everyone is equal here. And I think when you bring in folks from different areas, from different cultures and regions and ways of life, and demographics. You bring them in and you get them all competing for a kind of a common goal, which is all to get better. And I think that breeds and brings out character in people, and it breeds success in a really weird way.
Sure.
And, you know, obviously numbers are important and everyone's trying to get stronger and better and yada, yada, yada. But I think at the end of the day, if everyone's there for the same goal, same mindset, that's what matters. And that's how you get results, right?
Absolutely, for sure. I think surrounding your people, that's the whole thing, that whole idea of surrounding yourself with like-minded people, right? And how many people are out there, right, that don't have that crew around them. And, you know, as athletes, we can be so lucky that we're kind of forced in those scenarios where, you know, especially you know, at DNA was like everyone was in the CIS, everyone was trying to get better, trying to then go to the next level in many cases too, right? So you're kind of thrust in that position where all of a sudden there's all these people right around you that not only have that support, but then there's that friendly competition too, where you're not going to get that if you're just going to surround yourself with people who are, you know, are you're better than, so that you're just setting yourself up for success, or they're just never going to really push themselves to do anything either, which is just uninspiring at the end of the day.
Yeah, man, it's you know, as I've kind of gone on in my career, I think you realize a couple things. You realize that if you ever hire an ex-athlete that competed in a sport, like seriously competed, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get someone that knows how to work, that knows how to take criticism, that knows how to take constructive criticism, and that can manipulate themselves as required to be successful. And that is a huge, huge facet and piece of success that I think is lacking in a lot of non-athletes, not everyone, but a lot of non-athletes, because they haven't been thrown in that arena before. And that I think is still to this day one of the things that I'll always take away from the gym and athletics was getting a chance to work with like guys like yourself, guys like across the board, where you kind of see that that growth happening in the weight room. But you know later on in life that if that person can execute the way that they've given themselves up to get better in the weight room, you know that it's probably going to transition and carry over into other things, and that's pretty cool.
For sure. And it totally is. You got that totally right. It is that you know how to change the way you do things in search of that goal. You know how to set yourself up that you're going to be a part of this team. You're going to be a part of something bigger than you, right? And so many people are so quick to just be so focused on their own thing and their own inner feelings and everything, where a lot of athletes have had that opportunity where you can't go on the field full of all that anxiety, full of all that whatever weird ideas, because you have a job to do in that moment, wherever it is. And so many different sports have different intensity levels as well. But anytime it's at that really high elite level and you're about to step onto that field, that court, whatever, you know how to go, okay, listen, I got a job to do. Whatever's happening right now, I'm going to put to the side, and I'm going to be able to kind of, you get to see those superhuman feats, really, right? Like, not people who don't get a chance to get to a certain level in sports, they don't really understand like what the human body's capable of, because A, maybe they've never had to push themselves that hard, or B, they've never even witnessed someone else achieving certain things, right?
Yeah, there's a different, you know, like a lot. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people are grinding things out, whether it's a job or a professional degree or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
But when you're an athlete, I think when you bring in that physical side of that grind, you're studying, you're watching film, you're watching tape. I think that brings in another element to life that is an easy transition piece. So, you know, for me, I love to this day continuing to work with ex-athletes, especially in 2021, where we've had a massive push for inclusion. In my opinion, far over the top and far more than it should ever be.
Right.
I would say I still revert back to athletics and knowing when you get an athlete that's competed you know what you're getting. You know what that person's makeup is and what their DNA is. And that I think still resonates with me today.
Sure.
Not only in the hiring process of people, but I think even when you meet people and you click with somebody, and then 20 minutes later you realize like, it's another athlete here. Like there's always that weird bond, right?
Right. Absolutely. I've talked to some of my other buddies about this on the podcast, but have you noticed, is it less participation, less interest in sport? Because I always noticed, even in like back in high school, even like 1 or 2 years younger than me, it's like they didn't even care about sports anymore. No one was coming to the games. Like even at Western, like we'd have half the stadium full when we were like going into the Ontario finals. People just, there's certain age groups that are still interested, but like the actual students from the school, it was just like the support was brutal. What do you think about that?
Yeah, man, I don't disagree. I think we've seen I would say over the last 15 years in athletics, at least in the kind of competitive weightlifting sense, or the strength and conditioning sense of sports, we've seen a drop off in 100% intensity, drive, and focus. Like, and it's a coaching style maybe that we have too. Like every athlete's treated different, yeah, for sure. But at the same time, we felt like we've had to soften our approach in a really strange way over the last 15 years, year over year, where you're not sure what kids can handle. You're not sure how hard you can coach them. I think that was more of an afterthought in years past than it is today.
Okay.
I think that has a lot to do with where we are as a society, where we are with our devices and how we interact and how we don't. Yeah. I think honestly, it boils down to people don't have uncomfortable face time with other humans like they have in the past. They do it on a device where they don't need to answer for themselves. And I think that we've seen that slow transition, that slow societal transition from, from athletics to where we are now. And I think that's probably, there's some pieces there that are definitely linked.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I always kind of chalked it up to, because I mean, I'm a 91. So I was kind of just when cell phones were kind of coming in was when I was in high school. It was like when not everyone had a cell phone when I was in grade 9, let's put it that way. But everyone was starting to play video games. And that's what I was kind of like, man, these kids don't even care. They just want to play video games. They just want to go do something else. And now with these devices, with everything, talk about distractions, like, it's sad, but it's almost like these kids just go, oh, I don't want to go out and sweat, work hard, get potentially injured or whatever, because I can just go home and I can interact online. I can do my thing, and never with the phone. I can play 2K. Why do I have to worry about actually picking up a basketball? Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that transition is happening. I would say that, in saying that, we had a ball player this year who was drafted in the first round by San Diego Padres.
Unreal.
But in saying that, there's always going to be those elite level players.
Yes.
The flip side is there's a bigger gap now that we see. Like the mid-level, mid-tier type athletes are slowly kind of either not playing as much sport or they're doing other things. And I think we've become so solely focused on like, you're going to play baseball. That's all you're going to do. Like we had guys that were, playing until you get to a certain level of football or hockey, you are playing other stuff. Sure. And we're seeing not as much of that. We're seeing more of a singular focus now, which I think is a problem. I think that's a major problem.
Absolutely.
I think it's a problem with rest, recovery, recuperation from these athletes mentally and physically. Like we're seeing things like there's been some studies in the NBA looking at the lower leg, like tibia and fibula for a lot of athletes. And they're saying like, we're seeing stress fracture type injuries of guys that have played like 30-year NBA careers. And we're seeing this in like second-year players because of all the basketball they're playing.
Right.
So we're the caliber of athlete at the elite level is probably better. They're stronger, they're more fit, they're more in tune. We have more tech now to help them get better. Strength and conditioning's probably better as a whole. But we're also seeing that mindset at the elite level, like really dive into like a singular focus. Like it's going to be basketball 7 days a week, every single day. And not everyone can handle that.
Yeah. That super specialization, so when I was at St. Mary's, that's when NIDA was there. So the National Elite Development Academy, run by Basketball Canada. It was like most of the best basketball players for men's and women's in Canada all came to Hamilton. They went to school in the morning at St. Mary's, and then they'd go to McMaster and train. And again, that's part of that whole thing. And this is before the academy started getting big. And I think that's where that kind of morphed into, is you started seeing these sports academies come out. And again, that uber specialization, where I almost see it as like, if I'm a guy, I played, like, for instance, someone who played high school, any sport, and they're pretty good, maybe they started on their basketball team, maybe they were on the football team having a good time, but that wasn't like all they want to do. I don't, like you said, those mid-level guys, I feel like they go, I don't want to play basketball 7 days a week, so I'm not going to play basketball at all. And that's sad for sure, because, I think Gretzky used to always talk about when he was done hockey, he'd hang up his cleats and pick up a bat, or he'd, whatever he was going to play. It wasn't just all hockey, and he's the greatest of all time. But that's not, for me personally. My old man, he was a dual sport athlete, so he was all about play football because I was a better basketball player because of football, and vice versa. And you see that cross training happen too, right? Where I know personally, I would never have the footwork I have if I didn't play basketball. And that totally helped me on the football field and anything else really. And then now, after the years of playing football, if I ever pick up a basketball, that whole competitive drive and just like that turns back on, and it's, well, that stuff will stay with you for the rest of your life. But when that's all you can think about, you're going to burn out, right?
Yep, absolutely, man. Yeah, mentally and physically, it's tough, right? So I think we've kind of crossed a bit of a threshold there. Like we're seeing some elite, incredible athletes, like like LeBron comes to mind. He's the first guy that comes to mind, right? You look at like Brady, right?
Yep.
Nobody 30 years ago plays to his age because we don't know what we know today. We don't have the tracking devices. We don't have the Oura rings and the whoops that tell us how our sleep is and all this kind of stuff, right? So there's an awesome side to this, a data side and a kind of wellness side. Then there's the flip side to it, I think. So we've kind of we're an extreme society, right? So it seems like now more than ever, it's like you're either left or you're right.
Yeah, there's no room for nuance anymore,
for sure.
And that's terribly frightening. And I feel like if anything, now things are just so much more polarized that it's, and the pendulum swings back and forth, but right now it seems like it's just sticking in the extreme. And that transition period is so jarring and so dislocating that, again, people, it throws people off because they don't even know how to think, because you can't, you're almost, it's hard for you to relate to any of this stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that polarization is almost everything we do as a society now, right? Whether it's sports or COVID or anything, it's all very left and right. And to get back to center always seems like a battle. Right?
Absolutely.
You're trying to pull both ends. You're trying to meet in the middle. You're trying to figure out, okay, who's going to do what, whose feelings, and then now I think you layer on now how people are being coached, the kind of inclusion piece that we're in right now, and I think it's tough, right? Like it's challenging for sure, man.
That's the thing, right? Like I remember some of my, like, I mean, even at my coach at Western, Greg Marshall's known for being an intense dude. He's not gonna just say things in a nice, polite manner just because he's worried about your feelings, kind of thing, right? And when you're gonna go play for him, I pray that that first. But like everyone knew what the game was, so like if something happened, no one was like, oh man, why is coach yelling at me? That's how it went. That was how my high school coach was in basketball. Wild. Really, when I look back at it, most of my coaches were super intense. I look at it as intense, but I had even around me at the times, other parents saying like, oh, is everything okay? Like the way your coach is talking to you. And I was just like, number one, he's the nicest guy off the court, off the field. It's the same thing with Greg. He's great guy when we're not in the intensity of football, which again, out of context, he's awesome. But my coach in high school, off the court, amazing guy. But that would never come across when he's screaming at us in a silent gym because all the parents are trying to pick their jaws up off the floor. And again, he's not saying anything that wasn't pertinent to the game, right? But some people, they just hear yelling and they hear, intense, and that they can't actually decipher what people are saying. And that's always an issue.
Yeah. And I think that's why you're seeing that jarring spread that we have. Like you're seeing people that find value in that hard coaching style.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I read a Nick Saban quote the other day. It was kind of like, average athletes want to be left alone. Good athletes want to be coached, and great athletes want to be told basically what they should be doing or where they're wrong.
Right.
I think that's such a good, comment or quote in a nutshell of kind of where we are. And I still believe that most of the people that deal with tough criticism, and sometimes it can be harsh, but tougher criticism, I think have that grit and determination and that grind to them that does help out long term. I do believe that. I do believe, that in their studies to kind of, really talk to this, but
for sure
that mental fortitude, I would kind of coin it as, would be something that someone can take with them anywhere in life and succeed.
For sure. And if you're not exposed to that in any way, if anything, if you're avoiding all that, and that's that, like we're saying, I'm seeing that in culture more and more, is avoiding that and finding the path of least resistance and all that stuff as, oh, that's the right way, know your truth, all that stuff. And it's like, listen, you don't really know that going down that pathway, it becomes this echo chamber, you don't have anyone else now to actually guide you. You're going to be lost in the woods because we need others to help us. We're a cooperative species. And a lot of times what that help is someone freaking telling you, hey, this is the reality. This is what I'm seeing from the outside, because we can get so caught up in our own thing. It's hard to look from the outside in. But if you're surrounding yourself with good people, like we said before, or B, got a good coach in your life or a mentor of some type that's going to say, hey man, listen, this is how it actually is. All your friends right now, they might be sugarcoating it, but this is what you need to hear. Not everyone's going to be exposed to that at any point in their life, right? Let alone, right? That's the thing. Like even accidentally, you're not going to be exposed to that now, right?
Yeah. I read an article, I think today was Bloomberg or Business Week. Anyways, they kind of talked about, the article was titled, how to make your employees feel better about working from home, or how to make them kind of keep them going. And it read to me like you are really catering to people that need motivation. And I would go back to a simple fact, like you getting paid to do a job should be motivation.
Right.
And if I need to motivate you to do that job any more than I feel is necessary, I'm going to find someone else to do that job, just like on the field of play.
Absolutely.
If you can't complete a task in some sort of allocated time frame and it done well with, without a pat on the back, that to me is a problem.
Right. I don't know if you've ever watched Mad Men, but there's a scene where two of the main characters, Peggy goes up to Don and she's like, all I want is some thanks. Or like, and he's like, that's what the money's for. Right. He's like, I give you all this money to do your job, courtesy aside, listen, this isn't here to coddle you. We all want to get the job done. And I think that harkens back again to this whole thing about giving yourself up. And that includes giving your ego up to say that someone's got to coddle me through this whole thing and hold my hand because I'm so fragile, or I'm so concerned that I'm not even actually exactly sure why, right? It's interesting the source of some of these anxieties, right? Are it's hard to put your finger on some of them because they're so widespread nowadays. But again, people are just expecting all this extra stuff.
You know, it's funny. I got a coach at the gym, Faisal, and Faisal is Iraqi,
Mm-hmm.
and had really, crazy story. So he was an athlete of ours, played basketball like a long time ago.
Okay.
He was probably around maybe when you were around too. He was a young kid then.
Okay.
He came over. He came from Iraq, through Yemen, kind of, effectively like snuck out of the country with his dad,
Wow.
sisters, and a pretty cool story. And his dad actually worked for me at Up.
Okay.
And great dude, engineer by trade, like smart as hell, like got that bit of that like edgy. People are like, "Ooh, geez, this guy doesn't fuck around." Anyways, you talk to someone like Faisal, who's educated and kind of understands things definitely from a first and not first world perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll tell you, and his dad will tell you firsthand, like mental health is a Western issue.
Wow.
It is a Western problem that we have manufactured and created because we're so far outside of what we do as humans.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a lot of those places, and I've had long discussions with Faisal on this. Like, you are trying to figure out how to stay alive sometimes, how to get food, clean water, and keep your family safe.
Sure.
And that's it. And when you're worried about those basic necessities in life, you don't have time, man, to feel sorry for yourself or feel sorry for other people or wallow in your own shit. You're going to work and you're getting the job done. And I think there is some merit to that mentality.
Sure.
I think we get wrapped up in, like, I keep using devices because it's the first thing that comes to mind, but you wrapped up in your devices and Instagram, and I use Instagram all the time. But I think that perspective is good, right? And talk to a guy like him who's experienced this stuff firsthand, and he's like, listen, man, like it's a different world over here.
Sure. And I'll tell you because I'm a second generation Canadian now, and that was my grandparents were that coming from leaving Poland, leaving Lithuania during World War II. They went through so much shit that they weren't having, these hangups about anxiety. Yeah, they probably were dealing with potentially some type of PTSD and trauma that happens, right? But it wasn't like these manufactured things and these things. And like I said, even a second generation, I'm still fairly close to that. But, you look at some people that have been here for so long and just so a part of the North American idea of just, they don't have any, even in their family history, they don't have any real like strife and persecution that they can go, hey, listen, there's so much more happening. There's so much suffering happening in the world that I'm focusing on my own little thing. Like, let's look at the big picture here. Let's try and move forward instead of just it just becomes, I don't know. It just bogs things down, right? In a sense where there's no room for growth when we're just trying, again, dealing with things so much stuck in the past. Because again, that's what they say, right? Anxiety is you're stuck thinking in the future, and depression is you're stuck thinking in the past. And people are so stuck in both those things. I understand the nature of we have calendars and we have to think about the future in some form. But again, this presence, and I'm kind of hooked up. I just read that Eckhart Tolle book about the power now kind of thing. And he's talking about, presence and all this stuff. And that's really, again, it's perfect to harken back to sports again, because that's when you're in that flow state, that's ultimate presence, when you can access that. And that's what happens when you have that it's like when discipline and train, like, I think it's like discipline and luck meet each other or something. But anyway, like that moment where you're ready for it, you've trained for it, that moment's happening, you're observing that. That's that flow state that people don't really they can't go back and say, okay, listen, how can we get to that moment? How can we make this happen every day? Because we can get so much done. The potential for human growth and power all resides in that flow state. How can we get there? But we're stuck thinking about the past. We're stuck thinking about the future. And I think that so many people are stuck like that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why athletics is so beautiful too, right? Because you don't have you don't have time for that. Like if you're, wallowing in the past and you're sitting there and you're wondering, okay, this happened months and months and months. So you don't have time for that. There's no time for that bullshit. You gotta execute and you gotta move forward. And I think that's why coaching and athletics is so important, because you don't have time for that. And if you can't get out of that mindset of the past and learn from it and move on very quickly, you'll never reach any type of level of coaching or athletics, because your mind will not allow you to do so.
Yeah. And what Coach K said, the most important play is the next one, right? You'll never get anywhere if you're just stuck thinking about mistakes you've made. Learn from it, keep going. And again, not to say that we're equating like athletic challenges with like certain life challenges. Again, obviously certain people have gone through some strife and some stuff that we'll never
100%.
know. But again, as athletes, we at least get that taste of that challenge. That's something that, and it's the fact that we're choosing to do it. Every athlete is making that conscious decision to go, hey, I'm going to go do this. No one's forcing me to do anything. I'm challenging, I'm pushing myself. I want to put more weight on. I want to get faster. I want to get stronger. And again, people just don't challenge themselves in that way in most normal scenarios, right?
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree 100% for sure.
Yeah. And it's wild because so my boss is an ex-athlete, used to play basketball at McMaster. You talk about that whole thing where athletes, just attracts like kind of thing, right? And I think that we all know that at certain levels, it just goes without saying, right? I remember sitting on an airplane. I think I was coming back from Edmonton from a family thing, and sitting beside a guy. He was a offensive lineman at University of Alberta, and he actually used to play for the Eskimos. I don't know if he was currently playing at the time. Had no idea, but we just kind of, unfortunately, we're sitting right next to each other. So two offensive linemen in coverage, there's not a lot of room. So we're obviously up in each other's business. And we just get to talking, man. The whole flight went by like that because we were just chatting, like all those pretenses, all that stuff just gets shuffled away, and you're part of the fraternity of sport. And that's such a beautiful thing, right? And that comes, again, like within your actual career too, right? Like once in life, I should say, it comes within that, right? You just, all of a sudden, like we said earlier tonight, it's like, it just takes a couple minutes. And then the next thing you know, oh yeah, I played here. Oh yeah, I remember that, whatever. And you guys are bonded. And again, it's just cuts through all the bullshit and you guys can just get to that certain level. Right. And I think that's super amazing. And, you said you do look for those athletes too when you're hiring people, right?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I think, I always, I think about, I got 3 kids now, and I think about them, and, touching on, we don't, do I want them all to play sports? 100%. I care what level they get to. Yes and no. Like, obviously there's a weird part of me that's like, I want you to be really successful. Sure. But at the end of the day, like, Mel and I, my wife and I, lift at home every day, like, or we're lifting at the gym or whatever, and they're around us for a lot of that. And I think they've been around that environment where you're pushing and pushing and pushing yourself and each other. And we've never asked them, never forced them to work out or anything like that. And they're always kind of dicking around with us. And I think we hope, and like, obviously, they see the intensity on, like, on Raptors games and on Sunday when I got TV on and football. So they understand what that's all about.
Sure.
I think they're at some point will grasp all of it or parts of that push and need and intensity. And I think that's not a forced trait on our part. That's kind of what we do as a family. Yeah. And they'll mold into that some way. Maybe it'll be in dance or art or drawing or maybe sports. I think it's important to understand, we feel like we're their hardest coaches and critics. We feel like we're trying to get them ready for the next phases of life. And don't get me wrong, they're only 9, 5, and 2. So like, we got a long way to go, man. But it's kind of like you instill that kind of mentality of like pushing yourself, working hard, understanding what you're capable physically and mentally of. So like when I when I'm looking at hiring people, we joke all the time. Like, if you've got two candidates in front of you, and as an person in strength and conditioning and athletics, when you get two resumes in front of you, and you've got a guy that has graduated from Waterloo with math, and you've got a guy who's graduated Notre Dame in math. Mm-hmm. This guy from Waterloo, is top level at what he does at Waterloo. The guy from Notre Dame, he's probably good. Mm-hmm. He's probably not at the Waterloo level. Right. But the guy in Notre Dame played football there. And you're like, ooh, geez, okay. So you got a degree, and as an ex-person of sport, what it takes to get a degree and play full-time sports.
Sure.
So I think right away what you're getting. You can coach this person probably pretty hard and quite quickly, and they will adapt quickly.
Sure.
I think when you have those qualities, you have the ability to succeed a lot quicker, personally and professionally, than most other people do.
For sure.
You have, I think you have in a very strange way, you have been motivated your entire life, not by money, but by love or passion or guidance from inside within. And now you're going on the path of the motivation is probably a little bit more on the money side, which is cool. But I think when you combine those two things, you've got a pretty strong recipe for success.
Absolutely. And, again, if you look at that way too, right? Like, this person was still able to achieve that same degree whilst putting in, especially at Notre Dame, probably 40 hours a week of football. I mean, if we were doing 25, 30 at Western, they're probably doing 40, you know what I'm saying? If not more. So that comes up too, but that whole leading by example thing comes up too, right? It's you and your whole family. If it happens to be that, because again, that whole drive, that whole push, it does lend itself to athletics, right? It only does, right? Because it's one of the best places, one of the best crucibles to be in and push the body and see what you can actually get out of it, right? Again, why do we have the Olympics? Because we want to see what you can actually get out of athletics, right? But that doesn't mean that there's all kinds of other things. Again, like you said, dance, art, other pursuits that same discipline and passion that you can put towards sports, it'll work for that. And again, maybe sports tends to be a young man's game anyway, right? Because usually by the time we're in our 30s, the body's shot because we pushed it so hard. But then we can switch that whole mindset to the next thing, and that's the biggest thing. And that's why there's funding from the government for sports, is because they're not going, oh yeah, it's good for to get people's cardio going. No, it's because of these values that you can get. And again, that leading by example and understanding other people and realizing hey, we're a part of something bigger here. And I'm going to be able to give myself up for the team in a certain way. And any organization could benefit from that, right?
100%. Yeah. I think we as a society forget that we are, at its crudest form, very success or metric based. And the reason people love athletics, if they don't know why, is yes, they love to see people compete, but they love to see a winner and a loser. They love to pick a side and run with the horse. And when you watch the Olympics, you had this discussion all the time with people, you forget, when you look at a Usain or a Tiger or a Greg, you're looking at an individual that is the best on the planet at what they do. So if you're a teacher, there is no metric that you can put in place that makes you the best teacher in Halton, the best teacher in Ontario, or the best teacher in the world.
Sure.
So, and I'm not saying there isn't a best teacher in the world. I'm saying that sports allows us to look at an individual, man or woman, and say, wow, this guy ran a 9.58. I was on the treadmill the other day, man, and we calculated, my wife and I were calculating, we've got a curved treadmill, so it's self, so we get a speed going.
Cool.
So we were running 200s.
Yeah.
At my peak for the full 200 was 27 kilometers an hour. Put this in perspective. This is crazy. Put this in perspective. So Usain ran his 100-meter record on an average, that was my peak, an average speed of 34 kilometers an hour and a peak speed of 44.
Oh, man.
And I got off the treadmill and I realized right then why I will never compete in the Olympics.
Oh, geez. Yeah, right. Oh, man.
And it's a metric. It's cool, right? You're like,
yes,
man, I can measure myself against another human being at a very fundamental level.
Right.
And that's cool.
Absolutely. It's the most, it's if you talk about like goal-oriented things, right? That's what all sports is. You have all these incremental things, even from a young athlete, you have all these different levels that you can go through. And again, once, for whatever reason, once your athletic career cannot continue on in a certain way, you can still have those benchmarks that you can try somewhat artificially, because again, it's not as natural as it would be in sport, right? It's not, there isn't a gold medal for, well, certain jobs will have awards, but again, it's still so biased. It's no true test to say who is the best of the best. But in your own way, in your own discipline, you can create that in your mind. If you are the best, then that will only spread. And that example should only spread throughout the team if it's a solid team, though, right?
Absolutely, man. Like, I think that, you take that, you said earlier, like the physical part breaks down after a while. It's just how it works.
Sure.
But you take that mental edge that you used to have. And I think ultimately, in a really messed up way, like there's some great books, like, there's a tipping point and things like that, where I think you look at an athlete and in a really messed up way, after you've lost something, you start to get gratification out of that if you know how to use that loss to get better.
Sure.
And all of a sudden it's like, okay, losing sucks. Like, anyone that has anything to do with being a human should be losing. And if you don't, I feel like you've got some internal issues that you got to look deep into.
Sure.
But when you look at that in the workplace,
right,
all of a sudden you start to realize, okay, athletics is fun and you're trying to achieve a goal and you're with a team or it's an individual sport. When you get outside of that arena and you get into the real world arena, you may have, you got bills to pay. You got maybe kids and a wife and a family that you've got to provide for. I think that if that transfer can happen, or that transition crossover can happen, I think you've got a crazy cool recipe to see how an athlete has taken their physical and mental body on their own and transferred it and saying, okay, I'm going to support this new team. And this new team is, my wife and my kid and my dog. I think that's a really cool, like, from a mindset standpoint, that intrigues me. I enjoy that thought process of like that old hunter-gatherer mentality. Like, if there's two types. Like, there's the guys that are leading the pack that are gonna go and kill that animal and eat it, bring it home for their family, and there's other people that are gonna cook it.
Sure.
Right? There's leaders, and then there's that understand what's on the table and what's at stake, and then there's kind of other folks.
Role players.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Absolutely.
I just think it's very cool to see that work out. What I think is really cool is when you see what we would say average professional athletes in their domain leave sport and become ridiculously successful.
Sure.
And I think what's happened there is you've seen a transition of an athlete that was obviously elite. We see them outside looking in as average,
right?
Really elite.
Sure.
And they've taken that mindset and they flipped that into business and being a professional. That is cool. Because then I think the switch should turn for people and they should start to say, wow, even though we thought, that slot receiver was kind of average.
Sure.
He was average of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, which is still absolutely elite.
Absolutely. Right.
And that's cool.
For sure. I mean, again, that's that perspective switch too. Cause even back, that's why I always like to ask everybody too, is like, even when I was still playing football, I was surrounded by all these other guys that are still relatively small slice of the pie. And I always have to kind of remind myself like, hey, not everyone is part of this whole kind of club slash is this the same way of thinking. Cause you know, it's really easy for you to go, oh, the way I think is the way everyone else thinks. But again, you start to learn really quickly that you're a part of this whole thing, that like, you're again part of this small group of people that are taking themselves out, like, because again, the things you have to sacrifice and certain things that um you know, even just like social life stuff, like when you're really serious, you're not going out and partying, you're not going out and doing wild stuff, you are an athlete, you're doing your thing, you got to get up the next morning, you got to hit the pool at 5 in the a.m. and 5 in the p.m., like you're getting after it. That you're literally taking yourself out of society to learn all this stuff. And then when you come back after your athletic career is done, you're trying to bring all these lessons that you've learned and trying to teach all these people that might not even really understand where you're coming from at all, and might think like, oh, this guy's a go hard and he's too tough or whatever. But if we can all just put ourselves aside, because that's what it is, you got to kind of put your ego aside for a second and go, okay, listen, let's look at the realities. Let's look back and say, okay, what can we actually do to make things move forward? What kind of change can we really make? How can we be successful? How can we win at all costs? But again, it's focused on, what am I doing? Not part of this. And even there's certain careers and certain things where you're on your own, you're solo, you know, certain types of things, but we're all part of this bigger group, right? We're all part of this whole society, really. And when certain people aren't starting to pull their weight, it just all affects everybody else. And as any athletes, individual or team, you just feel that thing when you go, man, we've all sacrificed so much in the past for certain things. We all understand the nature of injury. We understand how things can change temporarily, but how can we get back to getting better, right? And you know, we look at all the things that are happening now with COVID and everything, and it's just like so stagnant, and they're just repeating the same things over and over. There's no big changes because everyone's scared of people's reactions, and certain politicians don't want to say certain things. And then all of a sudden, you know, people start getting shafted, restaurants get screwed. And I mean, that's going to bring us perfectly to fund the grind. But I mean, like, restaurants are getting screwed for no reason. Like, we're looking at if it's all this numbers game, restaurants aren't even like 1% of any of the cases that were happening, because they were on top of all this tracking, but yet they're the first people to go. And you know, obviously I'm not a server, but the brewery is super close to all of these restaurants, so we were crazy affected. But I couldn't imagine being a server, you know, living in Toronto by yourself. Now you're stuck in a 500 square foot apartment, chilling. You can't do anything.
Stuck. Right? You know, I think when you look at that, I did the numbers tonight just because I had a buddy text me. So 94% of deaths are 60 or above. Mm-hmm. So that means, I think my numbers are pretty accurate here, but that means that in this country in a year, 1,250 people under the age of 60 have died. And wow. You know what the problem is that none of these politicians have been athletes, because if they did, they'd step up to the fucking plate and they'd say, listen, you know what? We made a mistake. We thought this was really serious. And it is. People are dying. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we thought this was extremely serious. Mm-hmm. The data is clear now. It's not actually as serious as we thought. You need to wash your hands. If you feel like wearing a face covering, absolutely go ahead and protect yourself. Mm-hmm. No one is stepping up to the plate to say, listen, outside of long-term care, which we have royally fucked up, like beyond comprehension, and we are still dropping the ball there. You know, 1,250 people in this country, and I don't know this stat, this is purely off the cuff. I can probably guess that 1,250 people probably die in car accidents in this country every year.
Sure. It's got to be.
So the same
in Ontario.
So that's what I mean. So you look at this and you're like, okay, we're not downplaying the people who have died. No question. It's been horrible. It's really affected people over the age of 60. But there are solutions for that. Locking people down after 12 months of really a lot of data. And I would even argue, like, not even getting into what data is actual and what data has kind of been skewed. Mm-hmm. Just going on the data that we are given from StatsCan, You know, when you look at deaths year over year,
Yep.
those are absolutely in line, including 2020, with our population increase. So we had less deaths, total deaths, than we did the year previous.
Right.
And you're kind of like, okay, we know it's serious. We got it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we know kids are, immune is not the right word, but we're as close to child immunity as we can get. Like, I think there's less than a handful of kids in the entire country that have died.
Sure.
All had underlying health conditions.
Right.
And so you're like, okay, got it. Like, it's one of those things where I don't believe we're getting the information that we should be getting.
Sure.
That is a problem. That is not why, let's not forget, that's not why we employ our government. It's not the other way around.
So true.
They work for us. And they need to give us the information that is required to make adult decisions. And that's not happening.
Yeah. And again, they're so scared of the backlash, whatever, that they can't step up and say, listen, whatever, we made them, like, we've made mistakes, not even just listen, this is how we're going to go change things going forward. Yeah, maybe it's a 180 from things have been going, but listen, this is the data to back that up. But that does take unfortunately takes a certain set of nuts to do that. And as we've seen, our leaders haven't really stepped up to the plate that way. And it's a super bummer, because this is the time we need it. And, you know, luckily, you know, this is when the people are stepping up, and, you know, it's perfect time. The fund the grind comes around, and you guys are helping out the people who really need it, because it's going to take the people to do it. Right.
Yeah, man. Like, you know,
so how'd that come about?
Yeah. The idea there was, you know, Dan Lomas and I, who you train with Dan and Mike at the gym. Dan's a lax guy, went to High Point in the US.
Yep.
Great dude. And, you know, we were joking around one night, like, you know, instead of bitching about this thing, which we still are to this day, but instead of really like harping on where we are, let's try to do some good. And, you know, obviously, you know, Jared and Culicino in Burlington. So for those who are listening who don't know, it's Mark went to school with Jared. Jared is how I met Mark, and Jared runs a restaurant in Burlington called Culicino. And we're kind of talking about Jared and guys like him and girls like him, and that run establishments, and saying, you know what, this has been a killer to those places. Maybe we can raise some cash. And I said, Dan, we can raise 10 grand in a week, no problem. And he's like, there's no fucking way, man. And I said, listen, if I raise 5 grand tonight, can you step up to the plate and handle a lot of the stuff that I either am not good at or don't have time to?
Sure.
He said, fine. So we did it. We did 5 grand in one night.
Woo.
and kind of got things rolling. You know, we've had some cool interactions. So basically it's pretty simple. Like, people donate cash.
Yep.
Instagram, they go to the GoFundMe page, throw in cash. We then in turn give that cash right back to businesses. Anywhere from kind of 3 grand to 5 grand right now. And I think we're at about 45 grand today.
Unreal.
So yeah, it's cool, man. Like, I think the idea was, we're going to help out some folks that have been busting their ass for a long time to build a business. And when you come to this country, or when you're a part of this country as a citizen, or as a Canadian, the 2nd generation, 9th generation, you know, you're told, or you're given the impression up to last year, that you can run a business, provide for your family, put food on the table. And up until, you know, early 2020, that was the case. And then those people were told that they weren't allowed to do that. And that to me is not cool. Like, my grandparents came over here from Greece.
Yeah.
On a boat. You know, my nan came over here from England in the war.
Yeah.
And they both came over and started restaurants.
Sure.
Built a life for themselves, built a family, put food on the table, etc. And, you know, if I could go back in time and I could, you know, watch them react to what's happening now, I can guarantee you, because of our early conversation, when we're talking about kind of that third world type mentality of food on the table, you know, no bullshit, no feeling sorry for yourself. I can tell you right now that they would not deal with this the way we are dealing with this. There would be blood in the streets if this was 70 years ago. Heads would be turning, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
and we're different. I know we've come a long way. We're maybe, maybe a little more civilized, I guess, if that's the term you want to use.
Right.
But I think that I would love to see more of a pushback from Canadians. So when we started Fund the Grind, I was thinking to myself, you know what, man, like we got to help some people out here that need the cash just to buy them a month or 3 months or 5 months, whatever it is.
Yep.
Pay rent, put some food on the table, whatever it is. I think a lot of folks in this country are employed in a guaranteed position. So whether it's, teacher, fire, police, civil servant, medical, paramedics, hospital staff, government employees, a lot of our population is employed that way.
Sure.
I think, I'm not speaking for everyone, but it seems to me over the last kind of few months that a lot of folks that have guaranteed paychecks forget about the folks that don't have guaranteed paychecks.
Yeah.
And that to me is a shame because, you're going to the store, you're going to the restaurants, those are those people.
Yep.
And those restaurants you love going to and all that kind of stuff and all those, local coffee shops you love going to, they're not going to be around because they're not allowed to operate and you're not allowed to leave your house in very crude terms. That's not that far from the truth.
It's true.
So when we saw that, it was like, we need to try and we're not Barstool. This was obviously the idea came from the Barstool guys and Dave. They're killing it. They've raised probably, almost $40 million at this point, which is
unbelievable.
Unbelievable. For us, it was really about how do we give a little bit back, help out guys and girls, and keep their business running. And I think, we've done a little bit of good. We want to do some more good. So we want to keep this thing moving and keep this train moving forward.
Yep.
But it's tough, man. It's definitely emotional for me. Like, it's a tough thing to see. Like, I am in an extremely fortunate position where I don't need the gym to survive and put food on the table.
Yep.
And, my wife and I have talked about this numerous times. Like, if I can tell you right now, if I was in that position, I can guarantee you that gym would never, ever close. I would have been open the entire time.
Yeah, baby.
No questions asked. And like, it's tough, man. It's tough to see. Like, it is really heartbreaking. Like, I was downtown Toronto and you kind of see like these shops, like Dark Horse, like, like coffee, like we go down Saturday morning, get coffee, boom, it's gone. You're like, oh, the only place is open. I have nothing against Tim Hortons, a Canadian business, but the only thing that's around Tim Hortons. Yeah. And it's kind of like, you see the shift into, from really great small businesses and families and people where you go in and their damn name. Yeah. To Tim Hortons, can I have my coffee? You want to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Seriously.
Which sucks, man. It does.
It is. And that's the end road. That's the end game of this, is that we're just going to get stuck with friggin' Starbucks and Walmart, and everyone's going to be wondering why everyone feels like shit. And it's like, man, it's because you don't have any interaction on like any human level anymore. All these big box places have been so dehumanized and so, and so simplified that they can be the same wherever you are in the world, which is whatever, that's the way it goes. But you don't have that local feel anymore. You don't have any feeling that like, hey, I'm a part of some type of community. I'm part of something, again, part of something bigger than myself, right? Like, it's going to come to, if we keep going down this road, COVID or not, just if we keep going down this road of hyper individualization, not worrying about, or worrying about how other people are, so much so that you're creating laws that are keeping people in boxes and not allowing them to live free the way that they want to. It's just going to be sprawl. It's just going to be, there's going to be no more cities. No one's going to care. No more communities, just big box store, suburbia, big box store for the rest of the world. And again, we're all going to be set there going, man, what the heck happened? Why do I feel this way? It's because, again, I don't have that connection with people anymore that I used to have. And it's been taken away, all because I had to spend a year and a half inside and I couldn't go and hug my friends and hang out with my buddies like I want to. And next thing you know, now it's just status quo. And will be, because that's what I'm always worried about, because humans are so adaptable. We'll even adapt to the worst things as well. And then we'll just be like, oh, yeah, okay, that's cool. They let us out for 1 day a week. That's fine. Who knows? Like, right?
No, I got a guy that I know, so a strength coach, and did a lot of work in the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in Saudi, and really elite level stuff. And he explained it well, like the dehumanizing effects of not only compartmentalizing humans, but putting a mask on their face is extraordinarily horrible for. And the best example that he would use is he would say to me, look, you go over there as a foreigner, as a Canadian or American,
Mm-hmm.
and all the women have face coverings on. So as what we would see as normal, we would as Western culture, you
Yep.
go over and you see people, you bump into them and you go, oh, shit, sorry. After 2 months, you do that a little bit less. After 4 months, it's even less. And after 6 months, everyone is just an object in your way to a destination. So I'm going to Starbucks and there's 6 people in front of me that have face coverings on. I can't see their face. We recognize and we talk and interact through our face.
Sure.
Like, you don't walk up to someone in a bar because they got a great personality. You walk up to them because you're like, she or he is good looking.
Yeah.
Let's get after this.
Yeah.
And it's all because of facial recognition.
Our brains are set up. That's why we see a face in the moon and we see a face in things, because our brain is just wants to see a face.
100%. So if this goes on long enough, you will start to get a major dehumanizing effect on culture in general. You'll see people as objects in a path to a destination, not other humans. And that to me is a major problem. Like, I walk past people on the sidewalk, and if they have a mask on, I honestly, at this point, I don't even really kind of engage them, because I don't know if they're looking at me. I don't know if they're smiling, telling me, I don't know what's happening behind that mask. I don't like that.
Sure. Well, it like used to go in, if you went into a bank with your face covered and sunglasses on, you're getting tackled in 2019. But now that's everybody, right? And there's a reason why. It's because I don't even know. Like, I can't. We can glean as humans. We can glean so much from a face. We know, and it's cross cultural too. They know what a happy face looks like, what a sad face looks like. Every culture has these same facial, no matter what. Even uncontacted tribes in the Amazon. I mean, not uncontacted, because we wouldn't know, but like rarely contacted tribes, they can see this and glean that this person is a threat or isn't a threat just by the way they're, even if they just really see their eyes, but the whole face is so, it's so deep in our DNA to actually recognize this stuff. And now that we can't see it, again, it's dehumanizing. It's that, like what I'm saying, it's that one more step to just having a world of individuals, just all these islands that no everyone's separated, no one has any cooperation anymore.
Yeah, and I think like the one saving grace is we do have this medium that we're working on right now. Like, that is right. So that's obviously very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
We don't like, the frustrating part for me having kids is what this is doing. Like, as adults, you can get past it. I do agree with you though. We humans are extraordinarily historically dumb. We don't learn our lessons, and we're lazy.
Sure.
The easiest ways out, someone would say, some people would argue, it's not the smart way out. It's typically the lazy way out.
Right.
And we don't learn. The generations before us lost water, many of them. And what did they all say? No. We'll have never-ending water. Well, boom, you're done. You're all dead. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah.
It's been historically the path along the ways. So we look for the easy way out, and we look from a top-down society. Now, when you look at that and where we stand today, you have people that are in their house for better, for worse, choice, not choice, whatever the case is. They're not leaving their homes as much. They're not interacting as much. I think that as a societal problem is going to be ingrained. When you look at the kids now, like, you got kids going to school for days and days and days with masks on. That's a major problem in my eyes. We know, getting back to the kind of the data, we know damn well that this is extremely rare for kids. Not immune, but very damn close to immune.
Right.
There is absolutely no data backing up that kids should not be in school mask-free.
Mm-hmm.
This was what they said it was, that we were told from the beginning, that in October, mid-October, you would have seen the biggest spike in the history of spikes when you sent 5 million kids back to school in Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
That did not happen.
Right.
Why? Well, it's not because everyone's wearing masks, because kids were still getting sick. My kids were home sick for a few days as well. So people were still getting sick.
Sure.
And people forget very quickly that your touch points, when a kid goes to school,
right,
they wear a mask. Great. When they come home, they interact with us. No one's got a mask on. And then they go back to school. Then they re-interact. Sure. This spreads quite quickly. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you look at things now, like I think Bloomberg just said the other day that they figure by one of the MIT guys or Harvard guys figures that by April, there'll be 77% herd immunity in the US.
Okay.
Which tells you that this thing's been around for probably a while, mm-hmm. and probably is not that as serious as we're being told it is. Mm-hmm. You're over 60, you got to be careful. Put a mask on, right. Do your job. But we don't measure the flu, man. The flu spurs on a pneumonia, which is listed on a death certificate as a comorbidity.
Sure.
No certificate has ever said the flu.
Right, right.
We've never measured the flu. We've never measured flu instances on a per capita basis that we're measuring COVID right now.
Right, right.
So we're in a place that we've never ventured into before, and we're getting data that we've never had before.
Right.
And we're being told, we're not being told that. We're not being tempered with that kind of expectation. So I think when you combine that with the masks, with the isolation, you have a recipe for something, in my eyes, scary to think that kids are already on their devices. Mm-hmm. Now you get a mask on them. The interaction has gone like from here to here, now to here. So, I mean, as parents, we're trying our best to keep our kids interact with other kids and other humans and keep doing things. But it's not easy, man. And I think from that standpoint, to your point earlier, like that's a tough road ahead for a lot of folks.
The long-term consequences, right? Like a friend of mine, she's got a 2-year-old daughter, I think, and they were out walking around town. And this was kind of earlier, maybe back in May or June, but they're walking down the street, and my friend's daughter saw just a stranger, another person walking around, and was like, "Mom, like pick me up, like I'm scared." Like she was afraid of this other person. And my friend had to be like, "Listen, it's okay. It's just a stranger. Like, we're not going to go and like hug them, but like, it's okay. You don't have to be afraid of them." But that's where I feel like so many different age groups too, it's going to be affected differently. But like these kids are going to be interpreting this in such a weird way because they don't understand. Half of them, I'm sure, don't really truthfully understand what's happening. As many adults don't really understand, and now they just know that there's these new rules and that they have to follow them, or their teacher that they've never even seen their face, they have to listen to this space alien with like a face mask and a shit. Like if you're young enough, I couldn't imagine what that would seem like. This person, again, talking to you, can't see their mouth move, right? Like these children are still trying to develop facial recognition for their brain, like we were mentioning, and now we're interrupting that.
Yeah, and I think the problem is the messaging is very poor. Like, again, my kids, the two that really recognize like what's going on, 9 and 5, you know, we watch football every Sunday. And my daughter, you know, she's like, "Well, why does that guy have a mask on the sideline?" And I'm like, "That's a very good question. Why do you think?" She's like, "Well, for safety." And I'm like, "But they were just on the field." She's like, "Yeah, they were just on the field running into each other, literally spitting each other's mouths."
Right. Oh yeah.
Literally, they go to the sideline, they put a mask on, then they go shower together.
Oh yeah.
And like, I get it, it's for optics, but like don't piss on my foot and tell me it's raining.
Exactly.
Like, you know, like that's the only thing that really bothers me. It's like, come on, guys. Like, you want to run a Super Bowl with 30,000 people in the stands because you know the cash is there.
Yep.
If this were that serious, there would be not one person in any of those stands ever.
Yeah.
And they would have some sort of masking situation for the players. And you're telling 100%. Me in the NBA bubble that there was not one case of COVID? There is absolutely no chance that is even possible. I know personally know people that were in and out of that fucking bubble on a daily basis.
100%, bro. Do you think the Leafs were staying at the Fairmont and they weren't coming through the underground? No chance. They're paying. If I'm a player, I'm going to all the concierge. I'm giving them $10K each, and I'm saying, listen, you let anybody in. Just let anybody in. Here's some money. You know that happened.
100%. And they've got no, man. There are off-air stories, man. Like I know guys going in and out of those places, no question about it.
For sure.
There's no cases. So you're telling me you're not going to test a certain group of fellas,
right? Because
you know that there's a monetary gain behind that. That to me is the biggest slap. You're telling a place like DNA at the gym that you guys, we can't train 14 and 15-year-old athletes because they're not professionals. Well, maybe they are going to be professionals.
Yeah.
So now we're in. So on one hand, we've got a huge movement last year.
Sure.
With Black Ops, huge movement, awesome stuff, very much needed. Mm-hmm. And you've got a lot of people joining that movement that frankly don't belong there, that have never had a hard day in their fucking life.
Right.
Then you've got the other side to that is we're telling pro athletes that they can play, but that's not discriminatory towards the 14, 15, 16-year-olds that we're telling can't play because they don't get paid for a living. It's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, and you can't sit in the middle of the fence. You got to get on one side or the other.
Yes.
And that's what really bothers me about the whole last 12 to 14 months is if this were that serious, man, mask or no mask, you would not be cramming 110 people onto an airplane.
No chance.
That's absolutely illegal.
Yep. That's the thing is that, there's so many things like even just a cursory knowledge of virology and how immunology actually works, what would actually have to be done to truly quarantine things, just it could never happen. So we created these measures that were kind of half-step measures that were in hopes to help out and to ease things and to ease hospitals and all that stuff. But now they're being portrayed as 100% measures. Or not even. Now they're telling people to put extra masks on and stuff. And like, you're just telling people to do stuff that, again, it's like, as soon as, even if it's 99% effective, that 1% will still kill the whole thing. Cause that's just how that's how immunology and virology works. No one goes into a clean room thinking, oh, we killed most of this stuff. It's like, no, 100% is zero, but that takes hazmat suits, that takes chemicals, that takes all this stuff that is impossible in our society. And if that was needed, we would have figured out a way to do it. Like you're saying, we wouldn't be doing certain things if this was, as big of a threat as is being told to us today. Right. Cause obviously when it first came out, we had no idea, what are we going to do? We got to make some, right. But now we're a year and a half into this, or not a year and a half, year and a few months almost now, but like, we're getting into this. Give me some information, man. Don't just tell me the same thing. Right.
Yeah. You know what, man, I'm tired of hearing about the cases a day. Like, cases don't matter. Sickness matters. And very few people are getting sick. And that's a fact. And that's what we're not being told. And I think, a crazy story, I can't mention names, but I got a buddy of mine who runs a company that does cleaning work.
Okay.
He was hired at the very beginning of this in March to go into a long-term care center and evaluate a stage 1 audit of this place. This was one of those long-term care centers that had tens of deaths. He went in with his team in hazmat suits.
Yep.
This was after people had already died by the tens. Went in with his team, goes into this place, does a full assessment. Before he gets in the door, the staff, as well as the head of the region, says to him, you can't come in here with hazmat suits. It's going to scare people. And his response was, people are fucking dying and you're worried about us freaking people out? So they said, you can't do it. He said, we can't come into the site if we're not in proper PPE. So anyways, they let him in the site. They then sent him an email after. This is how much we've dropped the ball on this at the top level now. He then finished the assessment. They emailed him back and said, we appreciate what you've done, but we're not going to spend the money and we don't want to freak out our residents by putting these measures in place. He said he went in there, man, and there were half curtains dividing 4 people in the same room. And there's long-term care staff going from Johnny's long-term care to Sally's long-term care center in the same sometimes. And you're like, and the problem is no one hears about these stories. And the level at which this was fumbled from the top down, like I don't give a shit if you're left or right or left to center, right to center. It doesn't matter what government you belong to. Everyone has severely dropped the ball on this at every level. And it's about, they want to make it sound like it's about lives, and it's not. It's about votes.
Yes.
And the shitty part is that the guys who stepped up, you know, I'm just trying to think of like, there's a guy, Roman Baber in I think in your region or someone who stepped up and really put something really logical, rational together, smart dude. And he was just ousted. And I think that's where you see the disconnect. And I hope Canadians after a while will start to really look at this objectively and say, listen, you know what, we need more information. But at the end of the day, at some point, you're going to have to allow adults to make adult decisions. Right? You want to wear a mask? Cool. That's your right. But
for sure,
you cannot ask people. We do not ask people to change their lives because someone is severely overweight.
Absolutely.
You cannot ask someone to change their life and how they run their life over someone that may or may not get sick. That is up to the individual to take care of that themselves.
Absolutely. And like you said, the people who are in these positions now are just so afraid that they're not going to get reelected or that their name's going to get attached to this whole thing, that they're making these moves with so much selfishness, not having people's best interest at heart. Clearly, I mean, I think year by year now, clearly day by day, people are getting less and less, or people have less and less faith in government. And I think that it's going to require a serious paradigm shift that hopefully as you know, certain people are starting to turn over certain positions and certain generations are starting to get into these positions. Hopefully they don't just get in there because they learned how to toe the line. They learned how to say the right things. Hopefully we, like you said, as Canadians, realize what we really need, again, is a person that's not going to be just placating to us. And that's very difficult because these whole campaigns are just people lying to us, right? And as soon as they get in their position, they get to just do whatever they want. And that's a shame. And that's part of the big, it's clearly a big issue, bigger than municipal. It's bigger than federal. It's clearly a global political issue that we've given power to these people to help us run our countries. But especially in North America, we were never set up as a country. Like, you know, you look at, like, I'm not saying anything about their politics today, but you look at like France, where like the people have revolted. There's been major revolutions. The government essentially has that in their collective memory that, hey man, if we don't do this right, the whole country is going to show up at the door. And it's not just going to be like some kind of piddly thing that happened, you know, at the beginning of January. It's going to be like, this is going to be the real deal takeover. And in North America, that's never been the case. Nope. So all these leaders are sitting in these positions that are guaranteed. Everyone's happy, and as each person has then succeeded the former leader, it's only compounded, it's only concentrated all those feelings of just like, hey, we get to run all this thing. They think that they have all these votes, but we just get to make the decisions. We need to get back to something where the people really truly feel like they have some type of say, because now look how many people even show up to vote because they're so disenfranchised and they're so pissed off. They're like, I'm not even going to vote. And it's like, man, then the whole system has failed, right? We truly do. It's the same idea. We need everyone involved, or then again, now it's just skewed thing, and you can sit back and go, well, I didn't vote for him, and blah, blah, blah. Or like, did you vote for him? Oh, you're a piece of shit. Then it's like this whole thing where it's like, listen, it's still our kind of like, we're still living in the same place together. Why can't we figure out a way, instead of just blaming and shaming? Let's go, okay, listen, this isn't working. Let's make a new shift.
Yeah, I think too, like you see this, like definitely, I hope you see this in Canada. You've seen it in the US a little bit, right? Like, you know, half the folks were like, we need to get, you know, Trump, this lunatic, out of office. Half of them are like, we need this guy to stay. We love him. Now you've got a new guy in there, and people are like, you know what? This wasn't all it's cracked up to be. This is not what we thought. And then you've got a clear track record there of left to right, back and forth, extremes, right?
Yeah.
And you know, maybe, you know, my hope with this maybe is that the pandemic pushes people to more of a togetherness rather than apart. The problem is that when you're segregated and when you're isolated, that is how you pit humans against each other, is you segregate them. That is exactly how you do it. Like,
absolutely.
People, you know, I had this conversation with my dad, and you know, you don't have, like, this isn't the 40, like, you don't need to gas people in 2021 to get them to do what they're told to do.
Yeah.
Like, we've smartened up. We are a manipulative, smart population. We figure out ways how to get people to do what we want. Sure, at some point it was lethal. It doesn't need to be anymore. We can do that in non-lethal ways, and people are not quite seeing that, I don't think. I hope maybe something of this nature at such a global scale maybe brings humans back together to some degree. And like countries like France and Greece, like, I know, like,
yes,
you piss around there as a government, like, there is a good chance you could die as an official, get burnt part of a mob. Like, I'm not saying we should
choke on an olive.
Hey, whatever it takes, man. I think some of that stuff, to your point, is to have in the back of your mind that people still have some power. And I'm not saying overthrown countries. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying that is a good mentality to have. They know in a lot of those countries, they understand that they work for the people.
Yes.
It does not seem like that is happening in the country that we are in or the country that is south of us.
And that's what I'm saying too, right? It's that it's the government is scared of the people rather than the people are scared of the government. And it's not frightened, cowering in fear, but it's just that whole setup, that how big of a difference that is when you do look at them side by side, that these countries that have had that history versus our country, where we've only been able to, democratically at least, we've only just kind of been a part of it and let lobbyists and corporations just kind of like get sifted into that whole mix. And here we are today. But I was with you too, man. I thought for sure this was going to bring us together. You know, we lived through 9/11. We felt that it wasn't even part of our country, but we felt this crazy. It was like from New York City, you could feel like everyone was just together. You know, it was like, man, look how bad things could be. Let's move towards a better future. And then the rest of 2000s happened. But I thought that's truly what was going to happen with this. But again, I think just the nature of the quarantine just didn't even allow us to have that. Cause like, if we could be like, hey man, we're in this together, and like, you know, bump knuckles with people and whatever in the street, it's totally different. But it turned into, you can't even go out in the street, number one. And if you see someone, stay 6 feet away.
And if you still break those two laws, someone else can call the police on you for not doing those two things.
Big time.
Those measures that were installed, you have a recipe for really segregating humans without locking them in a concentration camp.
Absolutely.
You created a camp inside their four walls of the house that they paid for.
It's a prison. It's a nice prison with your own furniture, and it's got your computer and your device, but it's still a prison.
Which is technically maybe the most brilliant thing humans have ever done to one another in a manipulative sense.
Right. Well, that's the whole thing. That's like Brave New World versus 1984, right? Both dystopian ideas that the government was going to take over in this, but you know, 1984 saying that the government's going to be big brother and it's going to be oppression and censorship, which there's a lot of that going on. Don't get me wrong, but Brave New World was, we're going to be so attracted and distracted by our pleasures in life that we're going to forget about all this stuff that means anything. And we won't even need necessarily nefarious governments to tell us what to do, because people are just in la land, just worrying about getting to the next best thing. Rather than thinking about, hey, look, there's some serious issues that still exist in our world, that, let alone besides COVID, there's still huge disparities in poverty and war and famine and all this terrible stuff that affects the globe as one. But people are just so in their own world, they don't even think that exists anymore. You know, when Sarah McLachlan comes on with the starving children, you just change the channel, right? It's no more. That's the mentality, is that I can just switch the page, I can unfollow, I can block this person, and then you just curate your whole life into this beautiful thing, and then you wonder why you got punched in the mouth one day.
Yeah, man, and I think this is a very crazy human experiment that's happening right now, and it's scary as it trickles more and more into it, and we get deeper into it, where we sit. And I think, you know, someone said this to me the other day, this is, you know, the last 12 months has been the greatest shit sifter of all time of humans. Like, my circle has gone from, you know, X to Y.
Sure.
Okay, you and you're gone. Peace.
Yeah.
And I don't mind that, because it would have taken me years to probably figure some of that stuff out.
Sure.
But I think it's a shame that we've been it's been put to these measures for us to really have to act on stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I would say that, you know, when you see people making their own figment of rules in their imagination of what things look like in their world, it's like, you either follow the rules or you don't. You can't make your own boundaries. Like, just because you got 15 people in your backyard doesn't make it right. It's still illegal.
Sure.
You think it's cool because you're outside, but it's illegal. So you hanging out in the backyard or coming into my house is really no different.
Yeah, exactly.
So quit making shit up.
Exactly. It's all arbitrary.
It's all arbitrary, and it's very subjective. And I think allowing, putting people in a box like that, and then giving them rules to travel with. I mean, you've seen obviously the guy who traveled through the airport and kind of broke mold. And now I'm watching, I rarely watch the news, but I'm watching the news today. Yep. And now CB24 is like, just so we're clear, you do not have to quarantine. You do not have to take the COVID test if you're a Canadian citizen. I'm like, you guys are fucking news reporters. Why did it take some guy on Instagram to uncover this for you?
Right.
Because you don't want to cover it. And that to me is a shame. Like, a great show, I think they only had a couple seasons, was Newsroom. I think Aaron Sorkin did it.
Yep.
Man, it's awesome. I think back that my wife and I were talking about that the other day. I think it was HBO.
Jeff Daniels.
Right.
That
was awesome. And that whole show kind of encompasses, I'm like, man, this is crazy. Like, you're just being told. Like, I talked to my dad. He's a good example. He's 65, watches news, reads the Globe, fine. But I'm like, Dad, you need to get another perception of reality here from not CNN and not Fox.
Sure.
This is not working because you're regurgitating the same nonsense all the time.
Right.
And I think that's tough for a lot of people, right? So I'm hoping a lot of younger people understand that. But to your point, man, it's tough to get out of that little curated world you've got when your follows and unfollows mean everything. And, you know, I think those people don't give a shit about you. And until you realize that, that's a major problem.
Absolutely. You know, I think I remember the Dalai Lama, someone was sitting with the Dalai Lama and asking him, what's the most important meditation we can do in our time? And without hesitation, the Dalai Lama said, critical thinking followed by action. And I think there's a lot of action happening, but not a lot of critical thinking. And I think there's so many people out there that just are absorbing and reflecting and parroting certain things that they're not even, and it's because they don't even want to go into and entertain other thoughts. They just want to stay comfortable. And again, because you can do that, even watching major news sources, you can still do that. But especially today with Twitter and everything, if you follow the right people, you're only going to hear one very specific perspective, right? So it's in your best interest to go and actually listen to some of those people that maybe their view is antithetical to yours, because there's truth in both sides, and people definitely don't take that into account nearly as much anymore, right? That we probably agreed 95% of the time, but we focus on that one little part where we don't agree, where we disagree, and it becomes blinding.
Yeah, man. Like I know, I talked to a few people in the last couple of days, and a guy texted me today and said something along the lines of, I haven't been able to see my parents as much as I wanted to. They're older, you know, they're
Sure.
not. And I responded and I said, if what you just said to me, like read what you just sent to me aloud, that is not enough for you to take action, you've got a problem, in my opinion. Like if what you just said to me, that you can't see your parents when you want and they're dying, if that's not enough to really take a stand and do something about it, and I don't know what that stand is, that's different for everyone. Maybe it's a mask, maybe it's no mask, maybe it's pulling them out of their home, maybe, I don't know what it is. But if that's not enough, then what is enough? Like what pushes you over the edge? Because 150 years ago, 300 years ago, man, if you didn't get food or someone stole your food from your tribe, they were dead.
Yep.
We would annihilate them. I'm not saying we're 300 years ago. I'm saying we are losing our ability to fight for what we should fight for. I think you're seeing that in such a slow rate in the last 12 to 14 months. And that to me is a little bit sad. You've seen this, this herding of mediocrity of humans.
Right.
And we, us, them, you, me, we're doing it to ourselves. Like,
sure.
No one's forcing this on us. We are choosing to use these mediums to type on, to text on, to go back and forth on. To your point, like you follow the people, you follow the Tom Brady's of the world and these people of the world, but you don't follow anyone on the other side of the ledger. That is great because you can curate that if you know what you're doing and if you're mindful and objective and conscious of that. But most people are not. And I feel like that's why we are where we are.
And I believe that's the way that we can only discover if it truly exists an objective truth by looking at both perspectives. But because people only really look at one thing, it's so hard to discern anything that's going to really benefit the people as a whole, because no one's willing to put their swords down for 1 second and go and truly consider the other person's perspective. And that's what it is. I think if people can continue to exercise trying to just put yourself in someone else's shoes, just, you know, what do you think would be, again, like we said, there's so many people that have been unaffected by this whole thing. And then there's servers and stuff that have been, their whole lives have been turned upside down. And sometimes on both ends, you know, it's hard for each one of those groups to understand the other. But if we can try to, at least, and if we can kind of just, you know, just try and understand that other perspective, it'll just get us closer. You know, again, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think it's just going to, those little ideas, they grow, right? Those little memes, the smallest unit of thought, right? It does grow and it percolates through everybody, but it has to start coming from a group of people doing it, rather than people thinking, oh, no one's thinking about the other side. Oh, no one's thinking about this and that. It's like, listen, if we all get together and we can move mountains together. But if we're just contentious and we're on teams and it's just, I'm voting for this guy and I'm voting against this guy, then, you know, it's not gonna bring us to where we need to be.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I think that, you know, we have the ability within us, like we have the inherent ability in us. It's bred into us. It's been in us for thousands of years. I think we need to exercise that as a group. To your point, we need to look at both sides of the ledger. I think the greatest example is the election they just had in the US. It was like, I hate him, I hate him, this and that. It's like, okay, like let's put your feelings for the person aside, your emotional attachment aside. Let's look at it objectively. What did he or she do right or wrong? Okay, good. There's a list here. There's a bad list, but there's a good list too. And I think when you bring too much emotion into this, which is what we are getting right now as a population, it's like deaths, cases. It's like, okay, yeah. You know what? Unfortunately, this sucks. People die every day.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I had this very uncomfortable conversation with someone a while back, and they said, you know, you're inconsiderate, you know, you don't want to wear a mask. My son was born with cancer. And I said, you know, I obviously that's horrible. Like, no one would wish that on anyone.
Mm-hmm.
What you're not understanding is you asking me to change my life and my family's life for your son is no different than what you're accusing me of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at it from both ends of the spectrum. The longer this goes on, I feel the more resentment we're going to have for each other. People are going to be like, okay, everyone that's dying is over 60. I don't like people over 60.
Sure.
It's not the right attitude to have.
Yep.
And I feel like you start to segregate people and they start to build up animosity towards other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's one of those things where we're getting ourselves into a bit of a rabbit hole that I think if it goes too long could be very tough to dig out of. And you'll need something either catastrophic or something that is very, very large in stature to really move this needle.
Yeah.
And it's scary to me. That's what worries me.
Yeah. I totally agree. We're in this. We've gone so deep, and again, we talked about that adaptability and you know, complacency that exists in human beings. That, you know, it might take something so major to jar us out of this. And you'd think a global pandemic would be pretty jarring, but again, you know, it's only just switched the narrative to. I think one of the biggest issues is that they were, when it first came, it was always like, oh, this is going to be temporary. It's not going to last too long. And they've really been saying that for a long time. And that puts you in this mental limbo where you can, like, as a human, you can go into this mode where you're like, all right, this is just temporary suffering. I know it's only going to be a while. I can power through and then get out of it. But it's so easy for us that just to become our new baseline. And then all of a sudden, it's just going to be one step lower and lower in our quality of life until we're like, wait a second, what just happened here, right? So these little things that we're saying, you know, hopefully it gives people these ideas that they can grow, and that they can start to just that even just some of those ideas can be shocking enough to start busting them out of this monotony and start thinking, okay, how can we start making this better? How can we actually get back to something that's going to allow us to live a life that's a lot more comfortable and a lot more fulfilling and satisfying, rather than waiting on bated breath for our government to say, hey, it's okay to have fun again.
Yeah, that's tough, man. I think that's the key, right? Is like waiting. I think you just said it, like saying that out loud again, waiting for someone to tell us when we can have fun. That in itself that's a major problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That is crazy to think about, that is where we sit today. And it is where we sit. Like,
yeah,
my kids are fortunately not old enough to be playing, you know, extremely competitive sports.
Sure.
But, you know, that would be difficult. There'd be a lot of things that I see for our family that would be more challenging if my kids were older too.
Right.
But I think to your point, like that's we've gotten ourselves in a bit of a pickle here, and no one's really stepping up to the plate to say, you know what,
mm-hmm.
the data is clear now. We're going to go this route. You know, they don't have to apologize. They don't have to say they were wrong. They'll wordsmith it however they need to.
Oh, sure.
Right. And just say, okay, you know what, we're going to move forward, and this is how we're going to do it. The next 3 weeks is, but to your point, it's been a year, man. And at first it was like, okay, 2 weeks, 2 week lockdown, 4 week lockdown, 2 months. And all of a sudden it's like, this is a year later. Like, is no one, we need to have more people saying like, hang on, it's been a year now.
Yep.
And what you are telling us should have happened. There should be millions of people in this country dead, and there is.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, we get it. Wash your hands.
Yep. Don't
jam your hands in your mouth. Don't spit in each other's faces. But
sure.
There's going to be a population here, probably under the age of 40,
mm-hmm.
that start to say, I make X a year. I want to travel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do this, this, and this. And first we were told the vaccine is the cure. And it's like, well, you might need a few boosters. Well, this one only maybe works for so many days. Well, this one actually hasn't passed animal trials in phase 3.
Oh, no. Yeah.
This is an RNA. So this is really going to manipulate your genes, which we've never done before in the history of vaccination.
Sure.
Holy shit. Like, okay. And the problem is, though, again, I'll use my dad as an example.
Mm-hmm.
I think his comment and his demographic is a good example, and probably across the board. You know, his attitude is jam this thing in my arm so I can do what I want. But
yeah,
Dad, that is exactly the problem. What you just said is exactly the problem we are in today. You are waiting for someone to tell you what you can and cannot do based on their assessment of the situation, and that is wrong.
Right. Their assessment with all these biases and all these other things that are compounding and people talking in their ear. Exactly.
And a pile of cash, man. A boatload of cash at the end of the rainbow.
Big time.
Big time cash, big time control, and that is a problem.
Absolutely. And again, you know, if we can bring this all around, I think, you know, you talk about surrounding yourself with good people that are going to support you, and they're going to say, hey, you know, this is how we can think about this in a different way. And you can analyze it critically, and you can go, listen, this is how I feel about it. And then, you know, have those ideas disseminate through your friend group, and that'll just keep growing things in the right direction. That's how I see it. Right. That's how I see these podcasts too. I think there's so many podcasts that exist that everyone can sit in there and be a fly on the wall and listen to conversations like this and go, hey, you know what? There's some good ideas in there. Maybe you don't agree with everything we've said tonight, but if there's something in here, you know, think about it, mull it over. Maybe it might be challenging. Maybe it's something that goes against your thinking right now, but just step back from it, step back from the emotion of it, look at it. And again, if it still doesn't pass your test, then it's not good for you. But I want to see more of that critical thinking in society too. And I think that'll only get us to a better place, because clearly a lot of the thinking right now has just been kind of automatic, reactionary, and got us to a certain place. It got us through some potential tougher times, but now let's look at things, and that goes for everything, right? You know, even what we were talking about earlier with sport too. Look at it. You don't have to, if you don't think you're going to be a pro, that doesn't mean you're still not going to gain all these amazing values and extra things from being an athlete. And if you're young enough and you start, who knows, you might discover you have an amazing talent, right? But that just comes from challenging, stepping outside the box, right? And doing something that maybe not only you've told yourself that you can't do, but other people might say, hey, you can't do certain things. It's like, well, listen, you never really know until you try, right?
Yeah, you got an objective conversation, decision making, and that discussion in general.
Mm-hmm.
We're healthy, and we're not having enough of that. We're just being told. And I think, you know, to back up what you said, I agree 100%. Like, that's where we need to get to, is more discussion, less emotion, more discussion,
mm-hmm.
Get to where we need to as a group, as a population. And it may not be for you, it may be for you, but got to look at all sides, right?
100%. Totally agree, man.
Cool, man.
So if anyone wants to go donate, where do they go?
They can go to Fund the Grind. So you can find us on Instagram at Fund the Grind 2021. You can go on our GoFundMe page as well on Fund the Grind and give us cash so we can give it to people who need it. That's the gist of it, man.
It's beautiful, man. It's amazing. And, you know, we've already seen some restaurants have seen some of that already. And, you know, just seeing the story behind it and seeing people's faces when you guys go in and you help them out, like, that's huge. And again, hopefully that continues just to spread and again, with all these ideas that we were saying too. But again, thanks for coming on, brother. You know, it was great talking with you. Hopefully we can get you on again and talk about everything else. Cause you know, if things keep going, you know, we're going to always have something to talk about. You know what I'm saying?
Anytime, man. Love being on. Thanks for having me.
Wicked, brother. All right, man. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon. And everyone watching, you know, if you like the podcast, like us, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. If you guys like it, there's a few different tiers to check it out. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. See you, brother.
Man.